That time for our next exam. So I wanted to do a little video again, kind of prepping you for that. Uploaded it in a few locations so you can have it in a format that's good for you. Just a couple things I wanted to mention here before I go into the topic list. There are two specific things that are really traditionally problematic for this particular exam. First, during the regression analysis, chapter 4, two particular plots. People, forget about learning about the plots. Two particular plots: how to make a scatter diagram, analyze that, and the residual analysis, how to make a residual plot. If you've been using StatCrunch, there's a lot of stuff in StatCrunch that's really straightforward. You just do a menu. Residual plot is not one of them. You need to be very careful about looking at what is a residual plot. That it's the predictor, the x values, versus the residual, the y values. So you have to actually indicate that when you go into the StatCrunch. You have to be very particular about that. Second, probability. Not an easy chapter 5. A lot of different counting rules, a lot of things to remember. There is no magic blue pill that I can just give you and say, here, all you do is take this and then you'll be good with probability. It all comes down to practice, recognizing what rule applies when. The only way you can do that is by practicing lots of problems. So I know you've been working in my math lab homework. We will see some problems similar to that on the exam, but I cannot encourage you strongly enough to do all of the examples in the online lesson and the practice exam. I shouldn't say I was surprised and disappointed. There's always some people who just don't realize what resources are there. So you need to do that this time. Some people did not the first time. Everyone needs to do the practice exam and look at the solutions. Look at the examples there. I'm not going to give you the exact same problems, but those are the types of problems with the wordings, the things that I expect you to understand. What does independence mean? When do you do a permutation? When do you do a combination? Those are things that I really expect of you. So going through the online lessons, if you haven't already, look through those again, particularly at the end of chapter 5. There are some examples there that talk about choosing which strategy to use, and then the practice exam. Those are the things that you want to get, you want to take a look at, and make sure you study before the exam. So let's get into the topic.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about specifically what's going to be on the exam. I'm in the exam to review file within D2L here. Got some of these key links up here. First of all, you want to watch this whole video. That's what you're watching right now. It's in a YouTube, or you can download it to your computer in QuickTime, or copy it over to your iPod, your iPhone. The topic summary is below. I'm going to go through some of those topics here, but you should spend more time on your own. The practice exam too. Got either a Word format or Adobe PDF. Don't forget to check that with the solutions. In case you've forgotten, you can watch the video on the exam mechanics, how that works. If you need some extra practice, you can go through the online lessons, try them on math lab chapter tests, maybe review some of those technology skills we'll talk about in a little bit. So let's talk about specific topics. First, correlation and regression. We'll have one question here and about 5 or 6 parts dealing with different aspects here. I'll give you a predictor and a response variable. I might just give you a description first of all. There might be a second question that's just a question, what is the predictor, what is the response? So regression, you need to be able to make a scatter diagram using the technology of your choice, either Excel 2007 or StatCrunch. You need to be able to calculate the linear correlation coefficient, R. You need to be able to find an equation for the least squares regression line. Again, using technology. All this using technology. Don't try to do any of this by hand. R squared, the coefficient of determination. You need to know how to calculate that. You need to know what it means too. Click on the link if you want a refresher of that. And then a residual plot. Again, you need to know how to create it using the technology of your choice, and how to interpret it. And we'll talk more about that next. So with residuals, you need to know what a residual is. That it's the observed value minus the predicted value. You need to know the 3 conditions that you cannot have for a model to be linear. So make sure and review those under the residual section. And then you also need to know the difference between an outlier and an influential observation. So for probability, there's a lot of stuff here, a lot of different rules. like I said in the introduction, there's no magic blue pill here. You need to understand what a simple event is, what a sample space is. I'm not going to ask for definitions of these, but I might say, what is the probability of this event? You probably won't even see simple event because that's mostly our events are combinations of simple events. I might ask you to describe, like I do in the practice exam, what is the sample space for this probability, or for this probability experiment. The probability rules, they're all here. If you struggle with these, maybe some flashcards might be good. If you are studying some flashcards and you're having a hard time remembering them and you can only hold them for a little bit, maybe just when you get to the testing center, you copy these down on the front of your test, and that's fine too. For independence, this is a really key topic here. There are two ways to determine if two events are independent. One, if the conditional probability, the probability of F given that E has occurred, is equal to the original probability of F. That means E did not affect the probability of F. So that means they're independent. Another way is if the probability of E and F is simply multiplying the two together. Now, key point. Some people, when I ask probability of E and F, automatically multiply probability of E times the probability of F. But that is not the case. That is above here at the multiplication rule. You can only just multiply the probability of E times the probability of F if they are independent. So when in doubt, use this complete multiplication rule. If you need some practice about choosing which rule, you can click on this link and that'll take you to, I think, section 5.5 or something near the end there in chapter 5 where there's some practice choosing which rule. For counting, you've got different ways to count here. Again, lots of different strategies here. There's no quick way for me to do this to make it clear for you. You just have to look at lots of different examples to get comfortable. The probability distributions. It's important that you understand what a random variable is, that you know how to construct a probability distribution and what it means. The probability histogram, I am more likely to ask you to interpret one, not necessarily to create one. So don't worry about creating one of those in technology. Expected value. I can guarantee, a lot of this other stuff may or may not be on here. I can guarantee you will have an expected value question. And notice I've got, need to know how to calculate it, and you need to know what it means. So typically I'll have an expected value question. Maybe, I don't know, some of these questions take longer on this test, so there might be fewer of them, but they're worth more. So maybe it's 8 points, and maybe half of it is what does the expected value mean? The formula here is you take each particular observation times its corresponding probability, and then the sigma means you add all those up. The binomial distribution, you need to know the 4 criteria, and so sometimes what I will do is I will describe a probability experiment and say, could this be a binomial probability? And so you need to say, well, does it have a fixed number of trials? And then explain yes or no why it does within that context. Are the trials independent? And then again explain why yes or no it does in that context. And again, 2 mutually exclusive outcomes and the probability of success being fixed. I put the formula here. I'm hoping that you're using technology by now, either Excel or StatCrunch, to calculate these probabilities. You will be asked a binomial probability question. For mean and standard deviation, really the only thing I might ask is the mean, where really you just say, well, if I've got 40 trials and the probability of success is 1/10, well then the average I would expect is 1/10 of 40 or 4, and that's the mean. So really that's all I would ask. I'm not going to ask about standard deviation. And then last thing here, a little comment about the distribution shape. If this fact is true, n times p times 1 minus p is at least 10, the distribution will be approximately bell-shaped. So very quick overview there. As I mentioned in the preview, I can't encourage you strongly enough to look at the practice exam, try all of those problems, look at the solutions, try the examples, particularly in chapter 5 here at the end where you're choosing which rule. That can be the most challenging, so I strongly encourage you to do that. Expected value, binomial probability, those are things you know are going to be on there. With the probability, there's a lot of different things that I can ask, so there's no way to know absolutely what's going to be on there. It's important to get a broad overview of everything. I think I alluded to this before as well, but be careful depending too much on the My Math Lab homework. There are good examples there, but My math lab homework tends to be a little, more of the C level, the basic level questions, which are good, and I will definitely have some of those. But the questions that we see on the exam, there might be a few more that are more high level thought, like the ones on the practice exam. You'll see them there. There shouldn't be too many surprises for you, but you need to spend some time studying for this. If you have any questions, send me an email or make a post on D2L.